Hello, and here we are again exploring who we are as consciousness and realizing that we are really more than our physical bodies. That's what these after death experiences I've been describing really have to do with. It's really for you and I to be aware of who and what we really are. And that makes a big difference in our lives in terms of dealing with stress when we realize we are that which is knowing and aware of what's happening. That we're that which knows and is aware of the aches and pains in our body, but are not exactly the aches and pains. So that every morning when we wake up, I just review this again, the first thing we notice is we're awake. And before our mind gets cluttered with focusing on all kinds of objects, inner thoughts, outer things in the room, the first thing we notice is I am aware. So after that, I'm aware that I'm aware. So we wake up first thing in the morning, notice before you jump up and do anything, you're awake and I'm aware. And then ask, of what am I aware before you get into focusing on objects? Of what am I aware before I focus on objects? I'm aware that I am. I exist. And secondly, I'm aware that I'm aware. And in the knowing of our own being, there really can be no disturbance. In the knowing that we are awareness, there's no disturbance in that awareness, because awareness is like the empty space of a room, as we've talked about before. No objects in a room can disturb the space. You could blow things up, you could throw things around, and the space stays inviolable. Nothing does anything to it. Just like the sky with storms raging and so forth. And after the storm, there's the blue sky again. That's who we are as consciousness. That's a metaphor to point to this, which we can't see, but does all the seeing. That we can't hear, but does all the hearing. Now, that space in the morning, you can rest in that space for a few seconds, a minute or so, knowing that inherently this awareness is free, peaceful in that nothing can agitate it, and happy in that it lacks nothing, because nothing can be added to it, because it's only, there's nothing in itself other than itself. Essentially, objects may appear in it, but in itself it's empty and cannot be disturbed. Therefore, it lacks nothing and it resists nothing. It's just openness. So in the course of a day, you can always stop and reaccess this place by just using the word stop when you're feeling some stress. Take a breath. Notice the cool sensations coming in over your nasal membranes and thinking, cool. I can keep my mind cool. Pause, exhale, and my body calm no matter what's happening. And then breathing in, think cool mind. Pause, exhale, breathing out, calm body. Then lastly, breathing in, think cool, and then breathing out, calm. And then just be in touch with that space in you in which all this is appearing and disappearing, moment to moment. Your experience appears, whatever the content of the experience is changing, but you, that which is aware of that content, is not changing. Sort of like a windowless window frame. The now, the present is all there ever is. Right now I could be aware of thinking of the future. Right now I could be aware of thinking of the past. But right now is all there ever is, and I'm sure you're well aware of that. It's just reminding ourselves in that now, breathing in cool, breathing out calm. Now, in terms of other examples of experiencing a lost loved one after death, when my wife and I had lost our Bichon, Pixie, and a couple years ago, and when Pixie died that night, We were very sad and so forth, and went off to sleep. And as often happens in that 3 o'clock range, that's when I have these visitations. So at around 3 or so, I went from a dead sleep to suddenly just awakening, and I looked up to the right, and there's no light fixture, there was no light of any kind, but there was a flash of light, a golden white light, and I sensed Pixie. And I kind of thought about her for a little bit, and then I went back to sleep. And this happened 3 more times, maybe an hour, a half hour apart, and off to my right. So when my wife awoke, I said, "Hey, I feel Pixie came to us." And as I said that, it was about 6:30 in the morning. It was still a little dimly lit in the room, and off to the right, a flash of light, and she saw it. Moments later, as we're lying there, there is a white ceiling fan with a light fixture in the center, and it began to try to light. It was making a sound as if the electricity was trying to turn it on, like, and it lasted for maybe 10, 15 seconds and then stopped. And I said, "Did you see that?" And to my wife, and she said, "Yes." And I said, "What do you think?" She said, "I was just remembering how Pixie would come up and lie between us in the morning." So I've had patients that have told me about their being aware of their lost dog. Their dog had died, and they definitely had a sense of seeing it out of the corner of their eye, an image of it. So in light form. So again, besides the energy sensation of the departed loved one, there may be a visual like a light. In another example, my friend, a good friend of mine, a psychiatrist I was in training with, he died a couple of years ago, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was suddenly awakened out of a dead sleep, and I saw coming through the doorway to my bedroom a sort of yellowish orange ball of light. Came in, and I sensed it was him. And it came around again through the back door of my heart. I felt it come in, and I had a visual image of him. He was a medical doctor as a psychiatrist, and he was in my body. I saw an image of him in my body, reaching up and working on my glaucoma. Not that I had any major result other than I'm still seeing, and despite the real severe damage to my optic nerves, there may be some miracle in that I'm still seeing. Somewhat, not 20/20 certainly. Anyway, that happened during a week in which I was talking to a friend about a book called Journey of Souls. I've mentioned this before, by Michael Newton, Dr. Newton, who, when he was regressing people related to their symptoms, the example was, one of the first ones was that the guy had a persistent pain in his side, and he regressed him back into childhood, and then suddenly he was in a past life where he got wounded, and when he remembered being wounded, the pain left. Well, after those types of rather typical regressions to the source of the symptom, letting that feeling take you back to another time, another place where you felt the same way, or letting that phrase, take you back, a bridge back to an earlier moment. He started finding people going to a space that was between what they felt to be between their lifetimes, and they were in that place. They were all balls of light, and they had different colors. Some were sort of purplish, some were yellowish, and he had a different sort of gradation of the age of the soul and the level of spiritual development correlated with the color. And so I had been wondering about that. I hadn't had any experiences about that, so I thought, because when I had seen people show up, they'd shown up as a full person, as they looked in life, like my mother and this woman that I was mentioning last time, who looked like Gloria Vanderbilt, and she was very clear, just as clear as you're seeing me on the screen. So I was wondering, I said, does that happen? So my answer came in that my friend Vince showed up in this ball of light. So I thought, okay, maybe there's some validity to this. So again, if you look, you'll be led. If you pay attention, help is everywhere when you learn to really look, like the shamans have taught. So for those who've lost pets, again, I advocate communicating with them just like you did, whether it's in your head or out loud. The way I was dealing with Pixie's loss was I would just forget that she was gone, and I would look at the end of the couch at the end of the night to ready to take her out, and she wasn't there. And instead of just going and sinking into a feeling of loss, I would I would talk to her. I'd say, "Oh, well, you're not here to take out," and I would just start remembering the times that I loved being with her and having her, and I would just express my loss and stuff directly to her, and it really made a difference, easing the transition. So my wife wanted to get another dog, and she was online looking for a rescue and kept finding it really difficult, having to jump through hoop after hoop to try to fill out applications and so forth and compete with other people for the rescue. So finally, I just said, quietly went into a meditation and said, Pixie, pick a dog for us. And we happened to be at a farmer's market locally, and we went in, and they had dogs there, and walked in, and there were 4 bins, glassed in bins, where the puppies were. And all of them were preoccupied, could care less about us. But one looked up, walked over, eyes looking right at us. And in some ways, she looked like Pixie. And we had sort of thought we would get a dog completely different, so it wouldn't be a reminder. But that's not what happened. And her name's Penny. So Penny, that's what we named her, Penny Lane, like the Beatles song. So Penny Lane, you've seen her before. She came right over and picked us. And it's been wonderful. I had another experience with a patient who lost a horse that had been like so central in her life. Like it was the most consistent sort of presence in her life when she'd been let down and it suffered various abuse at the hands of extended family members and so forth. And when this horse died, she asked this horse to guide her to a new horse. And she'd be riding along, it was in New England, she'd be riding along past various mailboxes of farms where they had horses, and didn't see anything. And suddenly one, she saw like a little rainbow show up, and she pulled in, and there is where she found her next horse. And then interestingly, things were going well at the farm as she was getting acquainted with this new horse. But the people at the farm on the days when she wasn't there said, this horse is like a different horse certain days. And so we discovered that the energy, the spirit of the horse that died was coming in and hadn't let go, and she hadn't really let go of him, and he was coming in into this horse's body, was being attached to him in some energetic form, and the horse was behaving like the horse that had died. And then suddenly, this horse seemed to be developing some kind of condition and didn't know what it was, but the horse was appearing to be dying. She called a vet from Tufts in Boston University, and the very renowned veterinarian came down and checked out the horse. And that was going to happen that day that she came in for a session. So I did some Reiki, distant Reiki on the horse, and I had her, the patient, speak to the horse that had died and say, it's time for you to leave. I love you. I'll miss you. I'll never stop loving you, and I'll always treasure the time we had. And have her really say goodbye, and then tell the current horse, again, this is in the office miles away from the horse farm, but in her in spirit speaking to him, I love you, to the new horse, and I want you. And that's what happened at 10 o'clock in the morning during our session. 2 in the afternoon, I get a call from her. The vet came, and the new horse is fine. He can't find anything wrong. He's completely healthy. And after that, he maintained his health and continued on from there. But it took this communication with the lost loved one in the form of this horse that had been with her for some 30 years and saying goodbye. So the proof of the pudding is it worked. It had an immediate effect, a very dramatic and a deep effect and impact on her and her life. So, as crazy as it may sound, speaking to something you don't see, you may sense, or in that case with Pixie, I saw a light, um, and and with her, she saw the sign that depicted this other horse, the little rainbow. So, dealing with loss, biggest thing in our life is losing those we love. I remember when I was walking in a graveyard years ago, right after one of the best basketball games I had played in my life in college, probably the one where I was very much in the zone, in a zone where I was felt like I was orchestrating the game, and I'll get to that another time. And that's another example of consciousness, a kind of consciousness which we call flow, or being in the zone, where you're not in your head thinking a lot, you're just flowing and doing what's needed in the moment. So after that game, walking through, I saw this gravestone. It said, "All that's bright must fade, all that's fair decay. All that we loved was made to bloom and pass away." And it's sobering as those words were, that sense that that's inevitable, these bodies, but there is something in all of us that goes beyond the body, and we can experience it, and it's a place we can access that relieves us from the stress and storms of life and helps us with the loss of those we love, as we keep remembering that uh, as long as we love that person, and we'll never stop loving a lot of those people and pets that we've lost, there'll be times where we may be vulnerable to feeling, as the picture here, anger, fear, sadness, depression, because in the center is the heart. Because we love, we can feel that pain. And as we remind ourselves that it's going back to love, returning to love when we need it the most, when that stress hits, when that loss hits. So just keep that in mind as you go through this week, that it's valid and it makes sense to communicate with those we've loved and lost. Now, one of the things I added to that phrase in my head was, all that's bright must fade, all that's fair decay, all we love was made to bloom and pass away. And yet, in the words of George Gershwin, our love is here to stay. The Rockies may crumble, Gibraltar may tumble, they're only made of clay. And yet, our love is here to stay. Have a great week.